The air raid sirens wailed across the London sky as Lucy Miller hurried down the hospital corridor, her white Red Cross uniform swishing around her ankles. Stretchers lined the hallway, each bearing a wounded soldier, some moaning, others eerily silent. The bombing had intensified over the past week, and the hospital was overwhelmed with casualties. "Nurse Miller! We need more bandages in Ward C," called Dr. Hammond, his face haggard from 3 days without proper sleep. "Right away, Doctor," Lucy responded, quickening her pace. She had been volunteering at the London Military Hospital for 11 months now, ever since her husband Bradley Thompson had been deployed to North Africa with his regiment. The work kept her mind occupied, prevented her from dwelling on the gnawing fear that each day might bring a telegram bearing unthinkable news. Lucy had learned to armor herself with detachment. She tended wounds, changed dressings, wrote letters for soldiers who couldn't hold a pen, all while maintaining a careful distance. Attachment only leads to heartbreak in wartime, she often reminded herself. It had become her mantra, her shield against the suffering that surrounded her. As she distributed fresh bandages to the nurses in Ward C, Lucy glanced at her watch, a gift from Bradley on their wedding day 2 years ago. The face was scratched now, the leather strap worn, but she cherished it as her most prized possession. His letters had stopped coming 3 months ago. The official word was that his unit was in a sensitive position, communications restricted. Lucy told herself this daily, refusing to consider darker possibilities. Later that evening, as London descended into blackout, Lucy sat in the nurses' quarters writing in her journal by the dim light of a shaded lamp. "Another day of broken men," she wrote. "I bandage their wounds, but I cannot mend their spirits. Perhaps it's better this way, to remain distant, professional. Love is a luxury we cannot afford in wartime. Even my love for Bradley must be sealed away until peace returns. To feel too deeply would render me useless to those who need my steady hands." The air raid sirens began their mournful cry again. Lucy closed her journal and reached for her coat. "Coming, Lucy?" asked Nurse Dorothy, heading toward the shelter. "No, I'm on night duty. I'll stay with the patients who can't be moved." Her voice was calm, resolved. This was her duty. This was how she survived. As she made her rounds through the darkened ward, checking on patients while bombs fell in the distance, Lucy didn't know that her carefully constructed walls were about to crumble. Dawn broke with news that shattered the hospital's routine. A convoy of wounded Allied soldiers from the North African campaign had arrived at Dover and would be transported to London hospitals throughout the day. The first ambulances began arriving shortly after noon. Lucy was assigned to triage, assessing new arrivals and directing them to appropriate wards. She worked methodically, clinically, until the 43rd stretcher. Severe shrapnel wounds to right leg and abdomen. Fever indicates infection, the ambulance driver reported as they brought in a soldier whose face was partially obscured by bandages. Lucy bent to check his identification tags, and the world around her stopped. Her fingers trembled as they closed around the metal discs. Thompson, Bradley J., blood type O. Her breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. She leaned closer, and through the dirt and bandages, she recognized the curve of his jaw, the shape of his mouth. "Bradley," she whispered, her professional detachment shattering like glass. His eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. "Lucy?" His voice was a rasp. "Am I dreaming again?" Lucy's training battled with her emotions. "Get him to operating theater 2 immediately," she ordered, her voice barely steady. "And find Dr. Hammond." As they wheeled him away, Lucy pressed her back against the wall, her heart thundering in her chest. Bradley was alive, but barely. After months of telling herself that attachment was dangerous, that love was a luxury they couldn't afford. Her husband lay fighting for his life under the same roof where she had sought refuge from her fears. The following hours passed in agonizing slowness. Lucy was barred from the operating theatre, too personally involved, and instead paced the corridor, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. When Dr. Hammond finally emerged, his surgical gown stained with blood, she could barely breathe. "He's stable, but the infection is severe," the doctor said, removing his mask. "The next 48 hours will be critical. We've removed all the shrapnel we could find. May I see him?" Lucy's voice was small, unlike her usual confident tone. Dr. Hammond studied her face. "Briefly. But remember, Nurse Miller, he needs care, not emotion right now." Lucy nodded, though inside she was crumbling. How could she separate the two? Bradley lay unconscious in the recovery room, his skin ashen beneath the tan of the North African sun. And Fu dripped antibiotics into his arm, and fresh white bandages covered his wounds. Lucy approached his bed with the reverence of a pilgrim at a shrine. "I'm here, Bradley," she whispered, allowing herself to touch his hand. His fingers were warm, too warm with fever. "I'm right here." As days passed, Lucy found herself living in two worlds. During her shifts, she maintained her professional duties, caring for dozens of wounded men. But every spare moment was spent at Bradley's bedside, reading to him, talking to him, willing him to fight the infection ravaging his body. Her colleagues noticed the change in her. The distant, efficient Nurse Miller had disappeared, replaced by a woman whose eyes betrayed her fear and hope in equal measure. "You can't save him through sheer determination," Lucy, matron told her gently one evening, finding her asleep in a chair beside Bradley's bed. "You need rest yourself." "I can't leave him," Lucy said simply. "For months I've been telling myself that emotional distance was strength. I was wrong, matron. So wrong." Bradley's fever broke on the 5th night. Lucy was sponging his forehead when his eyes opened, clear and aware for the first time. "There you are," he said, his voice weak but steady. "I wasn't dreaming after all." Lucy's tears fell freely then. "No, darling. Not a dream." As Bradley gained strength, Lucy learned what had happened. His unit had been ambushed near Tobruk. Many of his comrades had died. Bradley had been reported missing, presumed dead, until a patrol found him and several others, barely alive, having been tended by a local family despite the danger to themselves. "I kept thinking of you," he told her one evening, as she changed his bandages. "I knew I had to make it home. And I kept telling myself not to hope too much," Lucy admitted. "I thought it was safer that way." Bradley's fingers curled around hers. "Hope is never safe in wartime, Lucy. But it's necessary." As weeks passed, Bradley's physical recovery progressed steadily. Lucy arranged to work primarily in his ward, and in stolen moments between duties, they rebuilt their connection. She read him newspaper articles, brought him extra rations secretly saved from her own meals, and in the quiet of night shifts, sometimes sat beside him, simply holding his hand. Other nurses noticed but said nothing. In a world torn apart by war, who would begrudge them this small piece of happiness? "Tell me about North Africa," Lucy said one day, as she helped Bradley take his first steps since the surgery. "It was beautiful and terrible," he replied, leaning heavily on her arm. "The desert stars are like diamonds, Lucy. Someday I'll take you there, when it's not a battlefield." The turning point came when military officials arrived to interview Bradley about his unit's final mission. Lucy was barred from the room, and when she returned, she found him sitting upright in bed, his face ashen. "What is it?" she asked, alarmed. "They're sending me back," Bradley said, his voice hollow. "Once I'm well enough. Special intelligence assignment, because I know the terrain." Lucy felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. "But your injuries are healing well enough for limited duty," he finished, not meeting her eyes. "This war isn't done with me yet, Lucy." That night, Lucy stood at the hospital window, watching searchlights sweep the blackened London sky. The fragile bubble of happiness she'd inhabited these past weeks had burst. Once again, duty would separate them. Once again, she would be left behind to wait and wonder and fear. "I don't know if I can do it again," she confessed to Matron the next day. Let him go, knowing what might happen. Matron, who had lost her own husband in the Great War, looked at Lucy with understanding. "None of us know if we can bear it until we must. But you're stronger than you think, Lucy." As Bradley's discharge date approached, Lucy fought an internal battle. Part of her wanted to cling to him, to beg him not to go. Another part, the nurse who had seen hundreds of wounded men fight for their country, understood the pull of duty. Their last night together, they sat in the hospital garden during her break. The summer air was sweet with the scent of roses that somehow continued to bloom despite the war. "I'll come back to you," Bradley promised, his arm around her shoulders. "I always will." Lucy rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I've learned something these past weeks," she said quietly. "When I thought I'd lost you, I believed that closing myself off was strength. But finding you again showed me the truth." "And what truth is that?" he asked, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "That love isn't a luxury we put aside for peacetime. It's what gives us the strength to endure war." She lifted her face to his. "I won't hide from loving you anymore, Bradley. Not even when it hurts." The morning of his departure came too quickly. Lucy was on duty but had arranged to see him off. They stood in the hospital entrance, both in uniform, she in her white Red Cross dress, he in his newly issued khakis. "I'll write whenever I can," Bradley said, cupping her face in his hands. Lucy nodded, fighting tears. "And I'll be here, waiting. Not just waiting, living and working and loving you every day until you return." Their goodbye kiss was brief but held all the words they couldn't speak. As Bradley limped toward the military vehicle that would take him away, Lucy called after him. "Bradley!" He turned. "I'm proud of you," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the distance between them. "And I'm not afraid to love you anymore." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "That's all I need to know." The months that followed tested Lucy's new resolve. Bradley's letters came irregularly, often delayed for weeks, sometimes arriving in bunches. She saved each one, reading them at night before sleep, carrying his words in her heart through long hospital shifts. Lucy channeled her worry into her work, but now she allowed herself to connect with her patients in ways she'd previously avoided. She shared stories of Bradley with young soldiers far from home, letting them see that she understood their longing for loved ones. "You're different now, Nurse Miller," Dr. Hammond commented one day after watching her comfort a particularly distraught young man who'd lost a leg. "There's a warmth to your care that wasn't there before." Lucy smiled softly. "I discovered that allowing myself to feel makes me a better nurse, not a weaker one." When the tide of war finally turned in the Allies' favor, Lucy permitted herself cautious optimism. Bradley's letters spoke of progress, of hope that the end might be in sight. Then, in early 1945, the letters stopped again. Weeks passed without word. Lucy continued her duties, clinging to hope even as fear gnawed at her. She had promised herself not to retreat behind walls of detachment, and she kept that promise, though it left her heart exposed and vulnerable. The news of Germany's surrender in May brought jubilation to the streets of London. Lucy watched from the hospital windows as people celebrated, her own emotions mixed. Where was Bradley? Was he alive to see this day they'd all fought for? A week after VE Day, Lucy was organizing medical supplies when matron appeared at the storeroom door. "There's someone asking for you at reception," she said, a usually stern face softening into a smile. Lucy's heart leaped, but she forced herself to move calmly, to not run through the corridors. She had been disappointed too many times to rush toward hope without caution. She rounded the corner to the reception area and stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. Bradley stood there, thinner than when she'd last seen him, with new lines etched around his eyes, but alive. Wonderfully, miraculously alive. "Hello, Lucy," he said, his voice catching slightly. She crossed the space between them slowly, almost afraid he would vanish if she moved too quickly. When she reached him, her fingers touched his face, tracing the contours she had memorized in dreams. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised I would." He took her hands in his. "The war's over for me, Lucy. For us. I'm home for good." Lucy felt tears spill down her cheeks, but for once, she made no attempt to hide them. "Welcome home, darling." That evening, they sat together on a bench in Russell Square. The park was coming back to life after years of war utility, flower beds were being replanted, benches repaired. Around them, London was beginning its long journey back to peace. "I've been assigned to a military hospital in Hampshire," Bradley told her, his arms secure around her shoulders. "They need officers with field experience to oversee rehabilitation programs." Lucy leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Hampshire sounds lovely." "They need nurses too," he added, a question in his voice. "Is that a job offer, Captain Thompson?" she asked, smiling up at him. "It's whatever you want it to be. A new start, away from London. A place where we can be together without air raids and separations." Lucy looked out across the park, where couples strolled and children played without fear for the first time in years. "I'd like that very much." As twilight softened the edges of the war-weary city, Lucy and Bradley walked hand in hand toward their future. The wounds of war would take time to heal, both his physical injuries and the less visible scars they both carried from years of fear and separation. But they would heal together. "Do you remember what you told me the day I left?" Bradley asked as they reached the small flat Lucy had called home throughout the war. Lucy nodded. "That I wasn't afraid to love you anymore. That gave me strength on the darkest days," he said, drawing her close. "Knowing that you were here, loving me openly, without reservation." "I learned it from you," Lucy said softly. "From finding you among the wounded and watching you fight to come back to me. Love isn't the luxury I thought it was. It's the necessity that makes everything else bearable." As they entered the flat together, Lucy glanced at the small calendar on her wall. She had marked each day of their separation with a tiny dot of ink, a ritual of patience and hope. Tomorrow, she would put the calendar away. Their time of waiting was finally over. The war that had nearly taken everything from them had instead given them an unexpected gift, the knowledge that love, far from being a weakness in difficult times, was the greatest strength of all.